Hello and welcome back to the Hill and Valley YouTube channel. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about gear. We like to center this channel around education, but gear is definitely part of our job and we use it every day. And ever since I started making videos about 10 years ago, the equipment we use has changed a whole lot. Things went from large camcorders and all the way down to smaller mirrorless cameras like we have today. So more specifically, today we're going to be talking about one of our latest purchases, our Sony ZVE1, and how that compares to our daily workhorse, the Sony A7S III. After doing some research, we saw a lot of videos on this topic and they were very technical, but we want to talk more about what it's like working with these cameras and the differences we've noticed on set between the two. When we first purchased the ZVE1, we thought it would be more of a travel camera and a little bit of like a behind-the-scenes camera. But since we got to know it and use it more and more, we found that it really is a mini A7S III, and we started to treat it that way. We'll bring it on commercial sets and we'll kind of keep it set up in a different configuration from our A7S so that we can use it side by side rather than as a B camera. Between the two, they are very similar cameras. They have the same sensor, they use the same battery, but physically they are definitely very different. So let's talk about it. The ZVE1 is obviously a much smaller camera than the A7S and lighter. The A7S is already very small and light to begin with, but something like this is even smaller and can really fit in your pocket. One of the first things you'll notice between these two is that the A7S III has a viewfinder and the ZVE1 does not. The ZVE1 is also a little bit smaller when it comes to the grip. The A7S III has a little bit deeper of a grip and is easier to handhold. Another major physical difference between the two is that the A7S III has dual card slots where the ZVE1 has one. And I know that will be a major thing for a lot of people and will really rule out the ZVE1 because a lot of people, like wedding filmmakers, require 2 card slots to make sure their media is backed up when they're shooting. Some other physical differences would be the ZVE1's integrated microphone, which really shows the direction Sony was taking this camera, more so for vloggers rather than people that are making commercial films. I also really enjoy the fact that the ZVE1 has a tally lamp on the front, so if you are recording yourself, you can see that the camera's recording. But also on set, if I can glance over at another camera operator and see the tally light on, I know that they're recording and everything's good to go. I'm amazed at how many ports they kept on this small little camera. It still has a microphone and headphone jack, it has a USB-C that can charge the camera, and it has a micro HDMI as well. A lot of people have qualms with the micro HDMI, but for what it is, for keeping the camera so small, honestly, I could care less. The A7S III is a full-size HDMI, which is definitely my preference. But if you're looking for something smaller and you know you're gonna have trade-offs like that, I think it's not really an issue. They can both touch to focus and touch to track focus, which is great. And I've found almost no difference in operation between the Sony A7S III and the ZVE1. All of my favorite recording resolutions and frame rates are there, especially after they updated the camera. It can now do 4K 120 10-bit, just like the A7S III, and has all the other codecs you would expect from the A7S III in this smaller package. Internally, the cameras are almost identical. The ZVE1's interface is a little bit more set up for vlogging, so there's a quick menu where you can dive into things like frame rate and resolution quickly without having to go through all the other menu systems, which we use the memory recall for on the A7S III. The ZVE1 also has memory recall, but it doesn't have a mode dial, so it's a little bit trickier to get into it. You can see they even included a zoom rocker on the ZVE1 for people who wanted to use a power zoom lens and zoom the lens remotely. So you might be thinking, if it's a mini A7S III, what's the point? Why wouldn't I just buy the ZVE1? It's about $1,000 cheaper. Well, there's a couple of different reasons. When you look at the physical differences, like I mentioned, the A7S III has dual card slots, it has a full-size HDMI. These are things that professionals are going to be looking for and will pretty much automatically rule out the ZVE1. Another thing that stands about the A7S III over the ZVE1 is the amount of customizable buttons. As a professional, I see this as a huge bonus because there's so many times when you're working on set and you just want to be able to accomplish something with the click of a button without having to hold up the entire project. The ZVE1 is fairly simple to operate, and as I mentioned earlier, there is a quick menu where you can customize all the different options you want in there, but sometimes relying on a touchscreen will result in you fumbling around while people are waiting for you to move on to the next take. That also goes for the mode dial. I like that the A7S III has a physical mode dial, that way I can glance down and make sure all my settings are correct just by looking at the mode dial. I don't have to wonder where I'm at in the menu. One other feature I've noticed that's different about the ZVE1 is that since it is tailored more towards vloggers, it has a really cool internal active stabilization mode which can use software to stabilize the image, and it really does quite a good job. I use this a lot more than I thought I would when I was traveling and didn't have time maybe to set up a gimbal, but I still wanted to get a little bit of movement in the shot. I use this active or normal stabilization mode quite a bit. I didn't use the dynamic active as much just because it crops in a lot and it starts to become very noticeable that the image is being stabilized. But if you just want to do small push-ins or little pans, you can do it easily with this mode. But because I am not a vlogger, when we got the ZVE1, I really thought that it would just be more of an alternative to the A7S and not so much a replacement. But I recently took it on a trip to New Zealand and Australia, and that's where the camera really shined. I was really struggling to shed weight in my carry-on bag, and just even the difference between bringing the ZVE1 versus the A7S, not just the physical difference between the two, but the accessories required for each one, allowed me to bring a lot more other types of gear and less of just camera equipment. One example of this is bringing the RS3 Mini versus our RS2. The RS2 is quite a bit larger and has a heavier payload, but when it comes to the ZVE1, you don't need as strong of a gimbal, so I was able to bring the RS3 Mini, which is a whole lot smaller and more compact. As I mentioned earlier, we bought the ZVE1 as more of a behind-the-scenes camera, but I've found it to be more and more just a partner camera to our A7S. If our other A7Ss are out on a shoot, we can use the ZVE1 as almost an exact replacement. We've brought it to film entire concerts that were over an hour in 4K 24 10-bit, which is really impressive because that's one area I've always been impressed with the A7S III versus some of the other older Sony cameras, is that it's much more durable and resistant to things like overheating or just weather resistant in general. And speaking of weather resistance, that's another area where I was questioning this camera because the A7S III is already pretty solid. I'm used to other cameras like the Panasonic S1H, or I came from the Canon 5D line, which were pretty much just tanks. And when you use something smaller and lighter like this, it feels a little bit less durable. But even down to the ZVE1, I brought it to New Zealand where it was raining, there were waterfalls, and I did have a rain cover on it at times, but it didn't have any hiccups at all. Honestly, I think both of these cameras are great in many different scenarios, and I would go as far to say as you can use them interchangeably. The one exception might be in weddings or something where you want to have the dual card slots just to keep your media backed up. The ZVE1 might have a small advantage when it comes to traveling just because, like I mentioned, you can use smaller equipment with it. But overall, I've used the A7S III for years and it's been very reliable, really high quality image, and it's never failed me. Between the two, it would be a really tough call. The ZVE1 definitely has cost and size on its side, and the A7S III has a few more features that somebody who's new to filmmaking that doesn't have other cameras might be interested in. I've been using the Sony A7S ever since the first generation of camera. I had the A7S version 1, A7S version 2, all the way up to now where we have two A7S IIIs, which are constantly running pretty much every day going out on professional shoots. It's what we're recording on right now. The ZVE1, on the other hand, is a newer camera to the market and it hasn't been as thoroughly tested. So I would say if you're using anything for professional client shoots, I would highly recommend the A7S with those more professional features such as the dual card slot and the viewfinder. But if you're not doing as much client work and maybe you're just doing some videos for yourself or YouTube, the ZVE1 is more than capable of anything the A7S can do, really. So I guess what I can say about the ZVE1 is after it survived this trip to New Zealand and Australia, it's been through all different types of climates, from drier, more desert type climates to borderline rainforest and torrential downpours. And I definitely didn't baby it. I treated it like I treat my A7S and made sure that I was there to get the shots I wanted and not let the camera become a limitation. So to summarize this video, these are both great cameras, and I think Sony's continued in the direction of making smaller cameras that are more cost effective with all of the features we know and love. If you look all the way up to their professional line with their Sony Venice, they even are able to use their Rialto unit to bring that camera to a smaller size and use it on films like Top Gun to get unbelievable shots that they weren't able to achieve before. And that's how I see the ZVE1. It's another tool in our kit to get shots that we weren't able to before. Like I mentioned, using it on a smaller gimbal, you could place it in smaller, tighter places if you want to get different types of POV shots, which has become very popular. So thanks for checking out this video. Hopefully there was some information that will help to inform your purchase if you're trying to decide between these two cameras. I really think they're two of the best cameras on the market right now. And leave us any questions down in the comments if you guys want to know. We've been using the ZVE1 for the past 4 months, and the A7S III we've had, like I said, we have 2 of them. We've been using them for years. We know these cameras inside and out. So please let us know if you have any specific questions, and please subscribe to our channel if you want to see more content like this. We do gear videos occasionally, but we're more so centered around education, which gear is definitely part of. And we have a series about our studio if you guys want to check out what we do on a day-to-day and how we've built our production studio. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.